What's up, adventurers? Welcome back to Big Juicy Hog Gaming. Today we're diving into one of the most iconic, terrifying, and absolutely bonkers creatures in all of Dungeons & Dragons. We're talking about a monster that can kill you with a glance, that dreams reality into existence, and that considers every other living thing in the multiverse to be inferior garbage that needs to be destroyed or enslaved. I'm talking about the Beholder, the floating sphere of nightmare fuel that has been terrorizing adventuring parties since the very first days of D&D. These creatures are xenophobic to a level that makes most villains look friendly, paranoid beyond measure, and so convinced of their own superiority that they literally cannot comprehend why anyone would dare to exist near them without permission. So strap in, because we're about to explore the twisted biology, insane psychology, and utterly fascinating lore of one of fantasy's most memorable monsters. This is the story of the Tyrants, the Lords of Madness, the creatures that look at a room full of adventurers and think, I can disintegrate all of them before breakfast. Let's start with the basics. A Beholder is an aberration, a creature so fundamentally alien and wrong that it doesn't fit into the natural order of any world. Picture a massive floating sphere, anywhere from 4 to 8 feet in diameter, covered in chitinous plating that ranges in color from brownish green to sickly yellows and purples. The body is all mouth, a massive gaping maw filled with rows of sharp teeth that can bite a person in half. But that's not what you notice first. What you notice are the eyes. Lots and lots of eyes. A single massive central eye dominates the front of the creature, and this eye is the source of one of the Beholder's most terrifying abilities. An anti-magic cone that can shut down any spell, any magical item, any supernatural effect within its gaze. Mages are reduced to helpless mortals. Magical weapons become mundane steel. Protective enchantments simply cease to function. In the presence of a Beholder's central eye, magic dies. Surrounding this central orb are 10 eye stalks, long flexible appendages that writhe and twist independently of each other, each topped with a smaller eye. And each of these eyes fires a different magical ray with devastating effects. One eye shoots a charm ray that can turn your closest ally against you. Another fires a disintegration beam that reduces whatever it hits to fine gray dust. A third can inflict a flesh to stone curse, turning living beings into permanent statuary for the Beholder's lair. The others? Paralysis, sleep, telekinesis, fear, slowing temporal effects, wounding beams that deal terrible necrotic damage, and a death ray that can simply snuff out a life with a glance. The Beholder doesn't walk, it doesn't crawl, it levitates through sheer force of will, floating through corridors and chambers with eerie grace, its eye stalks constantly scanning for threats in all directions. There is no sneaking up on a creature with 10 independently mobile eyes providing 360-degree vision. There is no blind spot. There's only the terrifying reality that the Beholder sees everything, and everything it sees is either a threat to be destroyed or a resource to be exploited. Here's where Beholder lore gets truly bizarre and fascinating. Beholders don't reproduce the way normal creatures do. They don't mate. They don't lay eggs in any conventional sense. Instead, Beholders reproduce through dreams, and this single fact explains almost everything about why they're so utterly insane. When a Beholder sleeps, it dreams, but a Beholder's dreams are not like the dreams of other creatures. A Beholder's mind is so powerful that it's suffused with reality-warping aberrant energy that its dreams can literally take physical form. If a Beholder dreams vividly enough about another Beholder, that dream creature can become real, manifesting somewhere in the vicinity as an entirely new living entity. This means that Beholders are, in a very real sense, born from the narcissistic fever dreams of their progenitors. A Beholder might fall into a deep sleep and dream about what it would be like if there were another perfect Beholder in existence, one that embodied all the qualities it admires about itself. And when it wakes up, the dream Beholder is real, existing somewhere nearby, with all the memories and personality that the dreaming Beholder imagined for it. But here's the nightmare fuel part. Beholders can never dream of a Beholder that is exactly like themselves. Their alien psychology and the chaotic nature of dreams means that the offspring is always different in some way. Maybe the eye stalks are arranged differently, maybe the coloration is slightly off. Maybe it has 11 eye stalks instead of 10 or 9, or its central eye is fractionally larger. These differences are usually minor, sometimes invisible to other creatures. To the Beholder that dreamed it into existence, those differences are utterly intolerable. To understand beholders, you need to understand that they are the most xenophobic, narcissistic, and paranoid creatures in the entire D&D multiverse. And I don't mean they're just really proud or territorial. I mean they genuinely, sincerely believe that they themselves represent the only perfect form of life in all of existence, and anything that deviates even slightly from their specific physical configuration is an abomination that needs to be destroyed. This applies to literally everything. Other species? Inferior garbage. Other beholders? Usually enemies that must be eliminated because they're not quite the right shape or color. Even beholders that were dreamed into existence by the same parent often end up in immediate conflict because the dreamer looks at its offspring and sees all the tiny ways it failed to be perfect. Imagine being so obsessed with your own perfection that you look at your own child, a creature that came from your own mind, and your first thought is, kill it, it's not quite right. That's a beholder. That's their baseline psychology. They don't just think they're superior to other creatures, they think they're the only legitimate form of life, and everything else is a mistake that the universe needs to correct, preferably through liberal application of disintegration rays. This xenophobia extends to members of their own species in ways that would be comical if they weren't so terrifying. A beholder might go to war with another beholder because the enemy has eye stalks that curve slightly to the left instead of the right. It might hunt down and destroy another of its kind because the shade of green on its chitin is fractionally different from its own. To outsiders, these distinctions are often invisible. To beholders, they represent fundamental wrongness that cannot be tolerated. The result is that the beholders are almost universally solitary creatures. They can't stand to be around their own kind for extended periods because they're always judging, always comparing, always finding fault. On those rare occasions when multiple beholders do cooperate, it's always a temporary alliance of convenience, and both parties are constantly plotting how to betray the other the moment it becomes advantageous. There is one major exception to the rule of beholder solitude, and it's somehow even more disturbing than the standard model. Enter the Hive Mother, also called the Ultimate Tyrant or the Overmind, a beholder variant that represents everything terrifying about these creatures taken to an exponential extreme. A Hive Mother is what happens when a beholder becomes so powerful, so infused with aberrant energy that it transcends even the normal limits of its species. These creatures are massive, sometimes growing to 15 feet in diameter or more, ancient beyond measure and powerful beyond imagining. Their eye stalks multiply, sometimes numbering 20 or more, each one firing devastating magical effects. Their central eye's anti-magic cone expands to cover a much wider area, and most terrifyingly, they develop the ability to dominate and control other beholders. Through a combination of powerful psychic abilities and sheer force of personality, a Hive Mother can override the natural xenophobia of normal beholders and bind them into service. The dominated beholders don't lose their personalities entirely, but they're compelled to serve the Hive Mother's will, forming a hierarchy of the ultimate tyrant at the top. These hives are rare, thankfully, because when they do form, they represent an almost unstoppable force of concentrated malevolence and magical firepower. The Hive Mother sits at the center of its domain like a grotesque spider in a web, surrounded by lesser beholders that have been physically enslaved to its will. It sends them out on missions, uses them as enforcers and lieutenants, and generally builds the kind of empire that individual beholders dream of, but can rarely achieve due to their inability to cooperate with anyone, even their own kind. From a storytelling perspective, Hive Mothers are gold. They take everything terrifying about beholders and multiply it, creating encounters where the party doesn't just face one eye tyrant, but potentially several, all coordinated and working together with strategic precision instead of the usual beholder tendency towards arrogant solo operation. The dream-based reproduction of beholders means that sometimes things go weird. When a beholder's dreams are particularly strange, influenced by drugs or magic or just the chaotic nature of their aberrant minds, the result might not be a standard beholder at all. Instead, you get one of the many beholderkin, creatures that share the basic eye tyrant template but with bizarre variations. The Death Kiss is one of the more unsettling variants. Instead of eye rays, its stalks end in tooth-filled mouths that latch onto victims and drain their blood. Imagine a floating ball of lamprey tentacles with a massive central eye, and you've got the picture. These creatures are vampiric hunters that float through the darkness of the Underdark, latching onto any warm-blooded creature they encounter and drinking them dry. The Goth is a smaller, weaker beholder variant, sometimes called a lesser eye tyrant. It has only 6 eye stalks instead of 10, and its powers are somewhat reduced compared to a true beholder. But don't let that fool you into thinking they're not dangerous. A Goth is still a floating ball of eyes that shoots magical death rays. It's just slightly less overwhelming than the full-strength version. Goths are sometimes used by more powerful beholders as scouts or guards, though the arrangement is always tense given the xenophobic nature of all eye tyrants. The Spectator is perhaps the most interesting variant because it's not actually evil by default. Spectators are beholderkin that can be summoned from other planes to serve as guardians. They're smaller than true beholders, usually only about 3 feet in diameter with 4 eye stalks instead of 10. Unlike their paranoid cousins, spectators are generally neutral, willing to serve whoever summoned them as long as the contract is fulfilled. They're still dangerous, still capable of firing magical rays from their eyes, but they lack the consuming xenophobia and megalomania of true beholders. It's like comparing a well-trained guard dog to a rabid wolf. Both have teeth, but one is significantly more likely to use them unprovoked. Then you have the truly bizarre variants like the Death Tyrant, which is what happens when a beholder dies but refuses to accept its mortality. Through sheer force of will and aberrant magic, a dead beholder can rise as an undead horror. A skeletal floating skull with rotting eye stalks that fire negative energy instead of the normal ray attacks. Death Tyrants are driven by the same paranoid xenophobia as living beholders, but now with the added bonus of being already dead and therefore much harder to permanently put down. Beholders are compulsive lair builders, and their lairs reflect their twisted psychology perfectly. A beholder doesn't just find a cave and move in, it spends years, sometimes decades, carving out an elaborate complex that serves as a fortress, throne room, and monument to its own superiority all at once. The typical beholder lair is built vertically, taking advantage of the creature's natural levitation. Spherical chambers are connected by narrow tunnels, often carved at angles that would be difficult or impossible for walking creatures to navigate easily. The beholder floats effortlessly between rooms while invaders struggle with the geometry, giving the eye tyrant a massive home field advantage. The entire structure is designed to maximize the beholder's mobility advantage while minimizing its weaknesses. Every chamber is positioned so that the beholder can retreat, reposition, and bring its eye rays to bear from multiple angles. Dead-end corridors become killing zones where the beholder can focus all 10 eye rays on trapped victims. Murder holes in the ceiling allow the creature to attack from unexpected angles. The whole lair is a 3-dimensional death maze designed by a paranoid genius with the ability to float and see in all directions simultaneously. But their lair isn't just tactically designed, it's also a shrine to the beholder's ego. The walls are often decorated with murals depicting the beholder's triumphs, usually rendered in disturbing detail. Chambers might be filled with petrified victims posed in tableaus showing their moment of defeat. Treasure hoards aren't just piled up randomly but arranged in patterns that please the beholder's alien aesthetic sense. Everything in the lair is deliberate, a reflection of how the beholder sees itself and its place in the world. The most powerful beholders eventually learn to infuse their lairs with ambient magic that warps reality in subtle ways. In these regions, gravity might behave strangely. Time might flow at different rates in different rooms, and the very stone itself might be suffused with the beholder's paranoid consciousness. Entire regions of the Underdark can fall under a beholder's influence, transformed into territories where the normal rules of reality bend to accommodate the eye tyrant's alien will. Invading a beholder's lair is considered one of the most dangerous endeavors in D&D, right up there with venturing into a dragon's mountain or challenging a lich in its phylactery chamber. The combination of narrow tunnels, perfect for the beholder's ranged attacks, environmental advantages that favor the floating creature over walking invaders, and the sheer magical firepower the beholder can bring to bear makes these lairs into legendary death traps. Here's something that makes beholders truly terrifying. They're not just powerful, they're intelligent. Incredibly, frighteningly intelligent. The average beholder has an intellect that rivals or exceeds the smartest mortal minds. They're tactical geniuses, master strategists, and capable of complex long-term planning that would put most evil masterminds to shame. They speak multiple languages fluently, not because they enjoy communication, but because they need to interrogate prisoners and issue commands to their enslaved minions. They study magic theory not to cast spells themselves, but to better understand how to counter and nullify magical effects with their anti-magic cone. They learn about architecture and engineering to design more elaborate death trap layers. They study the psychology and tactics of other species to better predict how intruders will behave in their domains. But this intelligence is wrapped in layers of xenophobia, paranoia, and megalomania that makes them fundamentally irrational despite their genius-level intellect. Beholder might spend months crafting an elaborate plan to eliminate a rival, accounting for dozens of variables and potential complications, only to throw the entire scheme aside because the rival's eye stalks are arranged in a pattern the Beholder finds offensive. They're constantly scheming, constantly plotting, and constantly analyzing every creature and situation for threats and opportunities. But they're also utterly incapable of seeing themselves clearly or recognizing their own flaws. Every Beholder genuinely believes it is perfect, and any failure is always the result of external factors, never personal limitation. Lost a fight? Obviously it was because the enemies were too numerous or too cowardly to face it fairly. Failed to dominate a region? Clearly it was due to interference from other Beholders jealous of its perfection. This combination of high intelligence and complete irrationality makes them unpredictable in the most dangerous way. You're not dealing with a mindless beast that follows simple patterns. You're dealing with a genius that operates on a fundamentally alien logic, making decisions that are simultaneously brilliant and insane. They might spare a group of adventurers because one of them wore a shade of blue the Beholder finds aesthetically pleasing. They might declare war on an entire city because a shopkeeper sold them goods in a transaction the Beholder interpreted as subtly insulting. Given their overwhelming xenophobia and paranoia, you might think Beholders would be completely solitary hermits that never interact with other species except to kill them. And while many Beholders do operate this way, plenty of others recognize that having minions and slaves can be useful for achieving their goals. The result is Beholders are often found at the center of small empires of dominated or coerced servants. These empires are always tyrannies in the most absolute sense. The Beholder sits at the top of a rigid hierarchy, issuing commands and expecting perfect obedience. Failure is punished with death, usually via disintegration ray. Success might be rewarded with privilege of continued existence. The Beholder doesn't consider its servants to be individuals with their own desires and motivations. They're tools, extensions of the Beholder's will, and tools that break, get replaced. Different Beholders favor different types of minions based on their individual neuroses and preferences. Some prefer to surround themselves with mind-controlled humanoids, entire populations of charmed slaves going about their daily business while secretly serving the Tyrants' whim. Others prefer monstrous servants like trolls or ogres, creatures strong enough to be useful but stupid enough to be easily controlled. Still others collect exotic monsters as living weapons, maintaining menageries of horrors that can be unleashed on enemies. In the Underdark, which is the natural habitat of most Beholders, they often come into conflict with other powerful aberrations and with the various Dark Elf and Deep Gnome civilizations that compete for territory in the depths. These conflicts are rarely resolved peacefully. Beholders don't negotiate in good faith, and they don't honor agreements any longer than it takes to find a way to betray the other party. Drow houses that try to ally with Beholders usually end up regretting it, though occasionally a particularly cunning matron mother will manage to manipulate a Beholder into serving her purposes, at least temporarily. On the surface world, Beholders are rarer but no less dangerous. Those that do establish lairs in surface regions usually do so in isolated locations like abandoned fortresses or remote mountain caves. They might establish cults or worshippers among desperate or insane humanoids, creating religions centered around the Beholder's supposed divinity. These cults are always creepy affairs, with members expected to demonstrate their devotion through increasingly bizarre and dangerous acts of service. In Beholder theology, which is every bit as twisted and self-centered as you would expect, there exists a figure called the Great Mother. According to Beholder myth, the Great Mother is the theoretical perfect Beholder, the ideal form from which all other Beholders are flawed deviations. She exists in some otherworldly realm, dreaming all Beholders into existence and judging them against her perfect standard. Different Beholders have wildly different interpretations of what the Great Mother looks like and what she wants. Some believe she has 12 eye stalks instead of 10. Others insist she has 8 or 15 or no eye stalks at all, with the central eye being the only important feature. Some believe she's massive, larger than any mortal Beholder could ever become. Others think she's small and compact, efficiency made manifest. Every Beholder is convinced that its interpretation is correct and all others are heresy. The really crazy part is that some scholars believe the Great Mother might actually exist, and she's a real entity of immense power dwelling somewhere in the far realm or another plane of existence. Whether she actually dreams all beholders into being, or whether this is just how beholders rationalize their bizarre reproductive cycle, is a matter of debate. What's clear is that the concept of the Great Mother is central to how beholders view themselves and their place in the cosmos. Those beholders who worship the Great Mother do so in characteristically narcissistic fashion. They don't humble themselves before a higher power. Instead, they see themselves as the closest mortal approximation of perfection, striving to become worthy of the Great Mother's approval by eliminating all imperfect creatures, especially other beholders that deviate from what they believe to be the ideal form. It's theology based entirely on xenophobia, which pretty much sums up the beholder worldview. From a pure game mechanics perspective, beholders are one of the most challenging monsters in D&D, and understanding why helps illuminate what makes them such effective antagonists in the lore. They're not just bags of hit points, they're complex tactical puzzles that require coordination, strategy, and often a bit of luck to overcome. The anti-magic cone from the central eye forces parties to make difficult decisions. The wizard who normally dominates combat becomes a liability. The cleric's healing spells stop working. The fighter's magical sword becomes a mundane steel sword. Parties have to decide whether to spread out and risk being picked off by eye rays, or bunch together and potentially all get caught in the anti-magic effect. There's no easy answer, which is exactly how the beholder wants it. The 10 eye rays mean that a beholder can affect up to 10 different targets per round, and it gets to choose which ray hits which target. It can charm the fighter in attacking the wizard. It can petrify the rogue who was trying to sneak around for a backstab. It can paralyze the cleric before they can heal anyone. It can disintegrate the ranger who's just landed a solid hit. Every round of combat with a beholder is a new nightmare as the party tries to deal with multiple, debilitating effects while also actually damaging the creature. And because beholders are intelligent, they don't fight fair. They retreat when wounded, using their knowledge of their lair's geography to set up ambushes. They target the biggest threats first, focusing fire on whoever seems most dangerous. They exploit party weaknesses ruthlessly. If they notice the wizard is the primary damage dealer, the wizard is getting hit with a death ray or disintegration beam before they can cast another spell. The traditional tank and spake strategy that works against many monsters is almost useless against beholders. You can't just have your toughest character draw the beholder's attention while everyone else damages safely, because the beholder has enough rays to affect the entire party simultaneously. You can't rely purely on magical buffs and healing because the anti-magic cone turns off all of that. You can't use most stealth tactics because the creature has 10 independently mobile eyes providing complete vision coverage. The result is that fighting a beholder requires genuine tactical thinking and often creative problem solving. Players need to use the environment, coordinate their actions, time their movements to minimize exposure to both the anti-magic cone and the eye rays, and find ways to deal consistent damage despite all the obstacles. It's challenging, it's deadly, and when you finally bring down a beholder, it feels like a genuine accomplishment. One of the most famous beholders in D&D lore is the Xanathar, a crime lord who operates in the city of Waterdeep. The Xanathar isn't actually a single beholder, but rather a title that gets passed from one eye tyrant to another, though each holder of the title is convinced it is the original and only true Xanathar. The Xanathar runs a vast criminal empire called the Xanathar Thieves Guild, controlling smuggling, theft, assassination, and various other illegal enterprises throughout Waterdeep and the surrounding regions. The organization is a strange mix of highly efficient criminal operations and the utter chaos that comes from having a paranoid, narcissistic beholder as the ultimate authority. What makes the Xanathar fascinating is how it demonstrates that beholders can be major players in urban settings, not just dungeon-dwelling monsters. The current Xanathar maintains its headquarters in the sewers beneath Waterdeep, surrounded by loyal minions and elaborate defenses. It issues orders through intermediaries, rarely revealing itself directly, building a mystique that makes it even more feared. The Xanathar is also known for its pet goldfish, which it absolutely adores despite generally despising all other forms of life. The goldfish, named Silgar, has become something of a legend in its own right. The Xanathar is convinced that Silgar is immortal, that the same goldfish has been with it for decades. In reality, the minions secretly replace Silgar whenever the fish dies, because they know that if Xanathar discovers its beloved pet had perished, The resulting rampage would be catastrophic for everyone in the organization. The bizarre attachment to a goldfish while simultaneously plotting the death or enslavement of everyone else in the city perfectly encapsulates the alien psychology of the beholders. They're capable of forming emotional attachments, but those attachments are as strange and unpredictable as everything else about them. So there you have it, adventurers, the Beholder in all its floating, eye-covered, reality-warping horror. These creatures represent one of D&D's most successful monster designs because they work on multiple levels simultaneously. Mechanically, they're challenging and force parties to adapt their tactics. Visually, they're instantly recognizable and genuinely creepy. And from a lore perspective, they're deep enough to serve as complex antagonists with understandable motivations, even if those motivations are completely insane. What makes Beholders truly special is that they're not just monsters to fight. They're characters, each one unique with its own specific neuroses, obsessions, and twisted worldview. Every Beholder encounter can be completely different from the last because every Beholder is a distinct individual with its own personality and goals. One might be building a criminal empire. Another might be conducting bizarre magical experiments. A third might be waging a one-eyed tyrant war against every other Beholder within 100 miles because they're all the wrong color. They're the perfect embodiment of the alien and unknowable monster that operates on logic fundamentally different from mortal reasoning. They're intelligent enough to scheme and plan, but irrational enough to be unpredictable. They're powerful enough to be genuinely threatening even to high-level parties, but not so overwhelming that defeating them feels impossible. From the original white box D&D all the way through modern 5th edition, Beholders have remained iconic because they perfectly capture what makes fantasy horror work. They're the monster that looks at a party of experienced adventurers and thinks, I can take them all. And the terrifying part is that they're probably right. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of D&D's most iconic monsters, smash that like button and subscribe to Big Juicy Hog Gaming for more explorations of TTRPG lore. Drop a comment and let me know. What's your most memorable Beholder encounter, either as a player or as a DM? Have you ever faced down an eye tyrant and lived to tell the tale? And what other D&D monsters would you like to see uncovered on the channel? Stay sharp out there, adventurers, watch your back, check for traps, and above all, if you see a floating ball covered in eyes, run. Just run.